Hey guys, welcome to the VO Boss Podcast. I'm your host, Ann Ganguza, and today I am honored to have a very special guest with me today, all the way from Nigeria, Kolade, also known as T-Code, which is such a cool, I love that name. He is a Nigerian voiceover artist, podcaster, and coach, and a 2024 SOVAS Award nominee for Outstanding Commercial Best African Voiceover. As the creator of Nigeria's first voiceover podcast, Everything Voiceovers, The African Perspective, and the creative partner of the Association of African Podcasters and Voice Artists, APVA, T-Code champions the African voiceover industry, mentoring new talents and collaborating with top brands to bring impactful storytelling to life. I love that. I love that so much. T-Code, it is so nice to have you on the show. Finally.
Finally. Thank you so much, Anne. It's been years of listening to you over the seas, and I can't express how excited I am right now to share the same podcast with you, being a guest. Oh, my God. Feels so great.
Well, I'll tell you what, you sent me, oh my gosh, years ago, a really lovely audio testimonial about my podcast. Yeah. And I just recently, and if obviously you've been listening to the podcast, you know that I never really did any ads or anything. And I finally decided, gosh, I should do some ads for my own podcast after, however many years. And so I started featuring some of the audio testimonials from people. And I featured yours. And then all of a sudden I got flagged in this amazing video that you created for me. And guys out there, bosses out there, if you ever want to do a testimonial that will get the attention of a potential client, right? This is a very boss move. I love this, T-Code. Create a lovely video that does a nice shout out that just, expresses gratitude. And it was a lovely video. And I was so touched that you took the time to create a video. And by the way, the production value was just amazing. So kudos on the production value of that. I mean, it was insane. And I was just so excited that you were excited. And I wanted to talk to you. With all these accomplishments, you are quite a VO boss. And so I was only too happy to ask if you would be on the show. And and my apologies because, bosses out there, I completely, I don't know about this time zone / day, but I completely messed up the first time that we were supposed to get together. So, I'm just so glad that we're finally here. And so glad to have you on the show.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. So let's talk about your start in voiceover, because I think a lot of bosses here, we know, what happens in our own little bubble here, but it's really difficult to really find out what's going on in other countries and how is voiceover, how is it doing in Africa, and how you're championing it. So I think it's a wonderful start to talk about how you got started.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about how I got started, and then we talk about the industry in Africa. I got started officially in So there was the 2016 version of me getting into voiceovers, and there was the 2020 version of me getting into voiceovers. In 2016, it was more of broadcasting because, as a broadcaster, I worked on radio, and that was where I got introduced to the world of recording audio. Prior to that time, even while I was in university, because I graduated from the university in 2015, I did a bit of radio stuff. And that was actually the first time that I would do a voiceover. I wasn't a presenter at the time, but someone heard my voice and said, "Oh, would you like to come to the university radio station?" Which I said, okay, yes, I did. And I got there and they said, "Oh, okay, what stuff have you got?" So the radio station's name was something around Varsity Radio at the time. And I just said, "You're listening to Varsity Radio," something around that. And they were like, whoa, that was great. And they allowed me do the voiceovers for the radio station, the audio branding and all of that at the time. But then I wasn't schooled about voiceover. I didn't really know what it
Sure.
was. So I continued my radio journey. 2016, I would go to other radio stations and do the same thing for the radio stations and the presenters on the radio. Then 2017, I started understanding what voiceover was because I was officially working on radio at this time. And
Did you have your own shows at that time?
yeah, I had a show on radio, but I was more on TV because the establishment was a TV and radio station, combined.
Okay.
So I was doing more of TV, but they would call me to do some of the promos for some radio and TV shows, and I would do all of those at the time. But I still didn't understand what voiceover was until fast forward to 2019. I was working in another radio station. The demand for my voice had increased and some money started coming in, but very little at the time. So I started getting curious to how the industry in voiceover was at the time. So I started asking questions. I took online courses, and 2020 was when I got into voiceover officially. So there were different versions of that. But late 2019, I took a bold step to find anybody who would need my voice on the internet. So I went on YouTube and I found some YouTube channels by Africans who were doing voiceovers on their YouTube channel as to narrate stories on the YouTube channel. But they weren't professional voiceover artists. But compared to what I was doing at the time, I could read better. So I would respectfully reach out to them and say, hi, I'm a radio presenter and a voiceover artist here in Nigeria. And I don't know if you don't mind, I would love to record your voiceovers. At the time, I didn't have any idea of exactly how the industry worked, but I just wanted a platform, somewhere to put my voice out there. So I reached out to a couple of YouTubers, and one of them reached back to me and was willing to offer me some stipend monthly for recording voiceovers for a channel, and that was how it started. So the moment I got to realize that I could earn a living from voiceovers and there was opportunity for me to improve and grow my skills, I took it so serious and I started looking for resources. And I think it was 2020 and 2021 I discovered your podcast, and it was just a whole new height for me because I was connecting to the voiceover industry globally, and that really just opened my mind to more about voiceover. So that's the story of how I got into this.
I love that. So prior to that, you were full-time in radio?
Yes, radio and TV.
Yeah,
I did that for about 6 years.
Radio. Got it. Radio and TV. So where did, I'm going to fast forward to the podcast because, you've been doing your podcast for a while now, and now you realize that it's a labor of love. And it is something that it does require focused passion to creating content that goes out there on a consistent basis. Talk to me about what drew you into the podcast. I mean, were there other podcasts, voiceover podcasts, let's say specifically in your area that talked about, African voiceovers or voiceover in Nigeria? What prompted you?
Okay, so my first foray into podcasting wasn't because I wanted to podcast at the time, and this was in 2019. So I was working on radio. I needed a medium to save my radio shows, right? Because people would listen, and radio is a medium. Yeah, radio is a medium where people just listen once, and you can't rewind. You can listen again on the go. So I had that program I was doing on radio, and I wish to archive it. So I was looking for ways to do this on the internet for free, and that was how I stumbled on podcasting. Because of course you could just upload an audio and it's there.
Right.
Yeah, so that was how I started.
I love that. That's so interesting because I have to tell you that I wanted to get into radio, but I wasn't, and so I said, "Well, let me create a podcast." So it's very interesting, and that was my radio.
Oh yeah, still feels like radio because I resigned from radio in 2021 to face voiceovers full time. But yeah, but back to the question of how the podcast came to be. So prior to the time I was entering into the voiceover industry, there was no voiceover podcast that I had heard of, and 2020, I took a course at the Voiceover workshop. That's one of the few voiceover training institutions we have in Nigeria. So I realized that there was more to this. People did this full time. There was an industry around this. So I was curious to know more. Podcasting was getting more popular at the time. So it just made sense that there should be somebody on the internet podcasting about voiceover. So a friend shared a couple of podcasts, and then I saw this article, the top 10 voiceover podcasts in the world. Your podcast was a part of them, with a couple of other podcasters that I respect a lot.
Wow.
Yeah.
I didn't even know that.
So
that's awesome.
yeah. And then I checked it out and I just fell in love with it because the style of the presentation, it was so real, so relatable. It felt like you were trying to help people, just groom them, feed them, and you break down these things. So I just stuck to your podcast, and I'd listen, and I checked the African space. At the time, there was only one lady from South Africa podcasting about voiceover, and it was quite refreshing to find her at the time, but not in Nigeria. I didn't find anybody in Nigeria. So I wanted to start because I felt it would be so great for voiceover artists in Nigeria to share their stories and
Sure.
and so people can know what we're going through, because a lot of things needed to be restructured in the voiceover industry at the time, in my opinion. But there was nothing like that. So from 2020, the idea came, but I had this imposter syndrome because I was like, oh, you're just young into the industry. How do you expect to be the guy to host people and just talk about voiceovers? So I delayed the idea till 2022. And in 2022, nobody was doing it. I'm like, well, you have to do it. So I started the podcast. Prior to that time, I had the experience of podcasting. I'd worked on radio. I understood how to record, edit, and put things together, upload a podcast. So I just took all of that knowledge and I started the Everything Voiceovers podcast, The African Perspective, which was for Africans by Africans to tell African stories. Yeah.
I love that. You know what's so interesting is that I don't know if it's a prerequisite or a requirement to be the expert. I think, if you want to start a podcast, because, for me, I remember before I started the podcast, I started my VO Peeps group because I had moved across the country and I wanted to kind of get to know the people in my industry. And so I basically started to interview my heroes. And that was how I became, I didn't necessarily present myself as the expert at anything, but I was absolutely interested in sharing resources and educating the community. And I think that is a great way to look at any type of a podcast that you want to start out there, bosses. So that you can share and educate. And I think that is a really great angle to come upon it. And so, I think for you do a lot of interviews in your podcast. And I'm sure people are very eager to get their voices heard as well. And so it's kind of a win-win for both.
Yeah,
for both
absolutely.
of you. Yeah.
Absolutely.
What would you say has been your biggest takeaway from, now starting and having a successful podcast? What would you say is your biggest takeaway? What's your biggest gift from the podcast?
That's a huge question.
And what's the and what might be the biggest or the challenge? What's the biggest challenge?
Okay, so first the biggest gift from the podcast and then the biggest challenge. I think the biggest gift from the podcast has been connecting me with the world. Like there's a huge, the world is so big and there are people waiting to be heard and people wanting to hear more. So my biggest gift is that I've been able to connect with the world and share that network or the stories that I learn across the way with people. Because of the podcast, a lot of people know me. And because of the podcast, I can also access a lot of people from different parts of Africa and even outside Africa. and it has helped me to grow such network that many prominent things happening in the voiceover and audio creative space in Africa, I am often involved in most of these things, and it's just a very humbling experience for me. So the network is a powerful gift that I've gotten. I think the biggest challenge for podcasting, as you've said earlier, and is that it's a, should I use the word thankless job, or it's a service? It's it's something.
It is.
Yeah, it's a very sacrificial thing to do, because literally, I don't know. I don't know how it works over there, but we don't get paid in Africa for podcasting.
No, we don't get paid here either.
Yeah.
And to get sponsors is very difficult.
It is. It is. So it's something that if you are not convinced, if you are not passionate and selfless, you're going to burn out real quick. I have invested my time, my energy, my money into this. I had to create a team. I mean, for the first 2 seasons of the podcast, I was doing this independently. And season 3, I took on some boss moves. To be honest, you inspired me as well on that. There was this episode you did where you talked about podcasting, and I think it was at the beginning of this year, you said something about how much you spent on podcasting the previous year.
Cheap.
Was it like $15,000 or something?
It was like
I can't remember.
$10,000 to $15,000. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
And when I heard that, I'm like, guy, you can do more. People at the top do a lot to get to where they are. So I decided, okay, I'm going to invest more into this. And my focus was to helping build a better voiceover industry. That has always been my inspiration to doing many of the things that I do. So, that's my gift, and the biggest challenge, the fact that you're just doing it on your own. But yeah, it's still a blessing at the end of the day.
Right. Now, you mentioned that you thought there needed to be restructuring, or you were wanting to be active in restructuring the voiceover industry in Africa. Tell us a little bit more about that. What, how has it evolved, and what do you want to do to restructure that?
Interesting. So, interestingly enough, yesterday I had a conversation with one of the very respected voiceover artists in Nigeria, top voiceover artist, on my Instagram page, where we talked about the evolution of voiceover in Nigeria. And I see something very similar to that in Africa. Voiceover, for the longest in Africa, has been heavily associated with broadcasting. I believe it's almost the same thing every other place. But the difference is that for a lot of African countries that I have observed, voiceover is still somewhat glued to broadcasting, meaning broadcasters are the ones who officially do voiceovers. Not many people come to claim the career to be voiceover artists. It is still being viewed as a part-time side hustle, right? When I was coming in, of course, it started as a part-time stuff for me as well, but I met a few Nigerian voice actors like Eric Maximus, who I was just referencing, King E, and a couple of people like that. These people stood out as full-time voice actors. Chilu Lemba, Femi Bakes, these are my colleagues. And I was inspired. And also listening to you, I realized this was possible. So, so the things that I felt could be restructured is that I needed people to see this more as a business, more as an industry, and gracefully, some people as far back as 1999, 2000 in Nigeria had realized this is what we needed to do. So they created an association in Nigeria at the time called the Association of African, Africa. Not Africa now. The Association of Voiceover Artists in Nigeria.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And this association has been for about 22 years. But unfortunately, the growth of the association has seen a lot of challenges because technology came quicker. The old era of voiceovers where everybody had to go to physical studios with the agencies and directors and all of that had gone. But a lot of people here were stuck in that era. So the new era of having a home studio, and working with international rates and how things are being done, live sessions, directed ones. These things weren't the norm over here, and I felt that we needed to do better. Our rates weren't standard, as it were, very low at the time when I came. And just the attitude of people towards voiceover is just like a side hustle. People didn't respect the craft. So these were the things that I wished could change. Also, if you look at the American space, you had organizations that would fight for voiceover artists, and you had resources for voiceover artists. The coaches, there were people who had written books, there were award shows and things like that. We didn't have so much of those here. You hardly would find any book written by anybody about voiceover. If you go to the internet, there were very scanty. So I felt like people needed to own this craft. People needed to build the industry, and I had to do what I had to do. There were a few companies like training institutions that existed already at the time. So I just had to contribute. I joined the association, joined another association called the African Association of Podcasters and Voice Actors, and together we started forming the policies and the building blocks, creating resources for voiceover artists, for podcasters in Africa, creating events like award shows. So we have the ABVA Awards.
Nice.
We have webinars. We started creating these things. And I must say it's been an interesting journey, a challenging one as well, but quite an interesting one since then.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's kind of like you're building it from the ground up, which I think is really amazing. And that is something that probably I'm knowing, having knowledge of building things, being a kind of a pioneer in building things as the technology evolves and as our space, voiceover industry grows. It's a lot of thankless things, a lot of donation of your time. And so I think it's wonderful that you have really kind of gotten in on the ground floor so that you can help to develop policies and guidelines. And then also you have a platform that's able to broadcast that out to the world. And what I love is, and what I'm hoping is that our connection here can also help you to be even more globally known, because that, of course, as I mentioned multiple times on my show, the podcast actually costs me money, but it also gives me a lot back in terms of people know who I am. And so I think we know, and I think you must also know that is one of the most important things when you're trying to get your voice out there and when you're trying to become known as a business as well, so that you can survive full-time on voiceover. Would you say that you are able to survive full-time on voiceover now, or is it still something that you are building? I know that it took me a few years to do that, and you've been working already at it for a few years. Is it something that is a realistic goal for, let's say, people in Nigeria to have a full-time career?
Yes, I'd say yes, but not for the vast majority, and here is why. For me, yes, I have been thriving as a voiceover artist full-time, and I have colleagues who are also doing the same full-time, but we're not so many compared to the US. And the reason for, if you look at those of us who are doing voiceovers full-time, we are multi-skilled. We are able to record, we're able to edit and produce, we understand acoustics, we have learned about voiceover, we understand marketing as well. So it takes, all of the skills to be able to stand and say, oh, I'll do voiceovers full time. But majority aren't able to do that. Also looking at the economic challenges and the reality surrounding what it takes to be a full-time voiceover artist. We're in a country, and largely in many parts of the continent, we don't have stable electricity. So you could be working and, you run out of power, and that affects your work, especially if you're...
And your livelihood.
Exactly, right. So there's also the challenge of being able to erect or build a home studio for yourself. And also the fact that the equipment could be very expensive. Looking at our exchange rate, when we convert this equipment that costs some maybe $500 or $200
Sure.
into naira or whatever currency there. It's a lot, so it's very challenging to decide to go full time into voiceover. But for the few of us who are able to do it, it's also rewarding. Especially, and I must say, the fact that we get to work with clients out of Nigeria, especially clients from the US, using platforms like Voice 123 and other pay-to-play sites, they open us up to opportunities with foreign clients, and getting paid in dollars has its own advantage. So yes, it's quite rewarding to work as a full-time voiceover artist, but it's also very challenging for a lot of us. Yeah.
So what would be your best advice that you would give aspiring voiceover talents in Nigeria, Africa, to if they're looking to get into the industry?
All right. So for people who are looking to get into the industry, the first thing that I recommend they do is to acquire knowledge. A lot of people still think, oh, you could just record voiceovers on your phone. And
Right.
I'm like, no, it doesn't work that way. So you need to learn. And I'm grateful that we have voiceover institutions in Nigeria, and also other parts of Africa. We've got one in South Africa. That's the South Africa Voiceover Academy. In Nigeria, we have Voiceover Workshop, Voiceover Academy. There are a couple of them. And they've been able to come together to gather the body of knowledge needed for young voice artists to start. So I recommend. Second thing I recommend is podcasts. Listening to podcasts helps to develop the required skill, in a sense, because you're listening to experts in the field. Now, I've been learning from you for many years, and we had never met, and it's been free. So that's the beautiful thing about podcasts.
It is a beautiful thing, isn't it?
Yeah, it's absolutely free. So I encourage people, because you might not be able to afford hundreds of dollars to have Ganguza or any other top voiceover artist. So listen to podcasts. I recommend that as well. The third thing is to practice and take the big step, because I've also been coaching people in voiceover for a while. I realized that oftentimes they come, they train, but they don't implement. There's this fear and imposter syndrome of calling yourself a voiceover artist. They hardly make the bold steps. They don't do demos and put themselves out there. They're waiting to be perfect. They're waiting to get it all figured out. So they compare themselves to someone like me or other colleagues of mine or people ahead of me, and they're like, I don't have what it takes. I don't sound like you just yet. So I always encourage them, start now when nobody even really knows you so much. Make the mistakes, grow, and you're going to, because we all started somewhere. We didn't start perfect. So these are the things that I'll encourage them.
And I also think, like, and this is kind of my big thing when I have students that say, well, I don't sound like, I don't, I'm not there yet. I'm like, in reality, and I think you must know, because you've had such a lengthy experience in being on camera and also in radio and podcasts, when you connect with someone, nobody's really listening to how you, we can sound good, but in reality, that is only like a temporary fleeting thing that, okay, it sounds good, it sounds clear, I understand you, but when we connect on an emotional level, and that really comes into the storytelling, that comes into that point of view that we're able to express. And I think that podcasting helps us to do that, like, especially if it's a conversation between you and I. But I use those skills in my voiceover to connect with that theoretical client. And that's really where it becomes the most important. So how important would you say the connection and storytelling is for, let's say, the current trend and styles that are happening in your area? Because globally, I think we all need to be able to tell stories. But I'm just curious in terms of locally, when people hire you, are they hiring you for that big, deep, booming voice? Or are they also hiring you for that storytelling capability?
That's a very good question, because in the continent, especially in Nigeria, I'm going to take Nigeria, we have been very influenced by the Western cultures, the things we see from movies in Hollywood, the cartoons that we've seen growing up. So these has heavily influenced how we tell our stories in the media. There's still a lot of true storytelling, I must say. But when people think about voiceover, a lot of young people think about Disney. They think about all the Cartoon Network stuff. And what that affects is the accent. So they're tempted to want to sound like the kids they watched growing up. They think that's what voiceover is. And it doesn't mean that's not what voiceover isn't. It just means the people you see on your screens, they're telling stories that are relatable to them. It's their local stories. The animation you watch, it's them. It's even though it's fiction, but the communication, the nuances, all of those expressions, they're very akin to wherever they come from.
Sure.
Over here, there's a way we tell our stories. The way we crack our jokes, the lingua. It's very local. So it's a lot of work to try to explain to upcoming talents that, see, your accent is good enough. Yourself, the way you sound
is good enough.
It's good enough. You are enough. You don't have to sound like Bobby. You don't have to sound like
I'm so glad that you like this. It gets me emotional, actually, because I'm so glad that you said that, because it is so important. And it's important for not just locally it's important for us. It's important for the world to hear those stories, right?
Yeah.
It's important for us to understand you and how you tell stories, because it may be different than how I tell the story, but it's certainly very interesting to me. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's something that I feel I could benefit from hearing, and I could enjoy it, and it could be educational, it can be entertaining. And I think just getting that experience and that culture and that storytelling is so important to a global audience.
Yes,
absolutely. Which I think is important to your business, which is so important to your business. So I think for anyone, and I love how you talk about the imposter syndrome, which I think we all have. I think that's a global thing, right? Everybody has imposter syndrome. I still think at the very heart of it, the fact that we can share and that we can communicate and we can connect with one another, I think that is something that is very much wanted and desired. It may not be as, let's say, marketable in certain places yet, right? Because even in America, there's a lot of places that say they want the conversational, connection, but yet a lot of times what you hear on television turns out to be something different because of whoever's directing you, whoever is, hiring, what they hear in their head, right? Because they could have grown up with those kind of, announcer kind of broadcast sort of sound, and that's who ended up directing you, and that's how the commercial sounds, or that's how whatever it is that you're doing sounds. But I do believe that when it comes to people that really want that connection, that engagement with their brand, that they're going to hopefully continually go more and more into the storytelling aspect, and it becomes less about your voice and more about how you can reach that person that's listening to you at the other end of the mic in reality. So
absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's all about the connection. So let's talk a little bit about, and I had my question, I had my question in my head, but let's talk about any type of, let's say, memorable story or project that showcased your, let's say, your unique storytelling. Like, is there anything that you can talk about that is out there on a global level that can really speak to your unique storytelling?
Now that when you say memorable, I've done a couple of voiceovers for different brand. I think the most recent that I did was for Coca-Cola, and so I've done a couple of them. I think the two most memorable would be getting featured on, or being a cast on one of the biggest animations to come out of Nigeria, which would actually be out next year, 2025. and that animation is called Iyanu. It's going to be on Cartoon Network, on Showmax in Africa. So I'm one of the cast, and it was such an honor to be on that, because it's not just a cartoon for the world to enjoy, but it captures African stories.
Yes.
The entire cast were Nigerian, so we spoke the true Nigerian accent. It was quite a mix of traditional and youth-friendly and young, all of that. So I'm happy to be on that. I play a character called Shiju, which people would come to find out much more about later. Then the other one would be my... recently I did a voiceover for a friend. She started this podcast and I recorded the voiceover, and I just... something about that voiceover stood out for me. It's on a podcast anyway, so it's memorable to me personally. It's not like it's for a global brand of some sort, but it's just something that when I think about that particular voiceover, maybe because the way I read it, it was just so real, and I just felt everything in that script. Very powerful story, very touching experience. It's titled The First and Last Time I Saw My Parents Dance, and that story was just so powerful. So yeah, that works for me too. It's on podcasts and platforms.
Awesome. Well, I'll be connecting those links up in the show notes for any of those bosses that are looking for more information. So tell us, what's next for you? Any exciting projects on the way, or other goals that you're working toward? Any other associations you're going to pioneer?
All right. Next up for me is my YouTube channel. Already I have the podcast running on YouTube, but I am planning on creating a YouTube channel where I talk more about voiceover extensively, particularly for Nigerians and Africans by extension. So that is going to be coming up next year. I also am working on some online courses, although right now I teach voiceovers. I mentor people one-on-one. I also teach voiceovers with other voiceover institutions of learning in Nigeria. But I realized that there's a lot of demand out there, and I can't always be physically there to teach over and over and over. It's very demanding. So I'm putting together an online course that will be available, and my website is also in the works. So and given by January 2025, everything will be ready. So these are the things I'm working on.
That's like next month.
Yeah.
I love it. So tell our bosses where they can find you, where they can learn more about you, follow you on socials.
Okay, so my Instagram handle is tcode_70. That's TCODE_70. My YouTube channel is I am Tcode70, so you can find me on YouTube, and on TikTok I'm also Tcode_70 TikTok Tcode_70 on X, which is formerly Twitter. My website will be out really soon, launched. So my website is iamtcode.com. iamtcode.com.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Love it. And that's coming January of 25. So now I'm hoping that I myself am releasing a new website that is supposed to be out in January of 2025 as well. So just a little refresh of my brand. So, oh my gosh, it has been so much fun chatting with you. And I am keeping my fingers crossed for Sunday, which is coming up in a few days, to find out about that SOVA's nomination. But the way I feel, if you're award nominated is just as good as award winning in my book. And actually, even that is subjective. But yeah, my fingers are crossed for you, and I'll be listening. I've got a couple nominations myself that I'm going to be, hopefully, we'll see if that works out. And in the meantime, it has been such a pleasure chatting with you. And I want to check up with you next year again so that we can reconnect and see what other amazing things you've done, because you are definitely the VO boss for sure. And it's been a pleasure chatting with you today.
Thank you so much, and it's been a pleasure chatting with you too. And thank you for inspiring me and millions of others because, yeah, a lot of people are still going to listen to this. Podcast is a platform that people can listen to many years to come. So thank you so much, Anne.
Oh, no problem. All right. I'm going to give a great big shout out to our sponsor, IPDTL. You too can connect and network like bosses, like T-Code and myself. Find out more at IPDTL.com. Bosses, have an amazing week, and we'll see you next week. Bye.
Bye. Wow, this was so great.